So, the title is In Between Prohibition and Progress. So I wanted to say how non-drug users can help, or at least not cause more problems for people who use drugs in between prohibition and progress. So ending drug prohibition is part of the social justice movement is the premise that I'm saying. And there's a lot of talk that what you have to do is view drug users as, or that ending that, okay, I'll just go on from here, it'll come to me. Okay, ending prohibition is part of the social justice movement. So, oh, I know, that drug users, the drug use issue needs to be viewed as a medical problem and not a criminal problem anymore. And we'll hear a lot of discussion about that. And, you know, I just sort of just grind my teeth a little, well, let's just go along. And the people that are realizing that are becoming enlightened and something's happening, but it's really not a good idea to have this be a medical problem. So, and there's lots of examples for why that's not so. So I'll just say what I think it is a social justice movement. So, and then I would say consider that, see this thing isn't going. It doesn't go. Someone know how to make a slideshow, just show you the next slide and the next slide. Push down like that.
Reduce the time per slide?
I don't know how to do time per slide. But anyway, so I'll just keep talking so it leads up to 15 minutes. So ending prohibition is part of the social justice movement. So I was saying consider that ending prohibition of currently illegal drugs is parallel to other movements that we may be familiar with historically. So getting abortion legalized was a very important to the liberation of women. But it isn't just liberation for women that ending abortion, you know, that abortion being illegal was. Of course, a lot of you won't remember that, but old time as well. And then getting the vote for women and getting recognized as persons was also really important for equality for women as well. So the other parallel that I see is slavery. So, you know, there were slaves in the U.S. and they were slaves and people owned them, and there was a movement to end slavery, which is, you know, a similar movement as getting prohibition ended in many ways. So I think that ending slavery was, or having slavery made illegal was very important to creating equality for African American people. And as we all know, they still don't have equality, but it would certainly not be happening without that. So I think we need to view in a much broader context something like ending drug prohibition. And that can guide us how we behave towards people who use drugs as we're heading towards ending drug prohibition. So there are things that well-meaning people do that are not helpful to the most vulnerable people who use illegal drugs. And the other thing about knowing what is harmful to people who use illegal drugs over a period of time is ever-changing. So in order to do no harm, it's incredibly important to always involve people who use drugs. So, and involving people who use illegal drugs, when I say that, when Vandu first formed, was very focused on involving the most marginalized drug users, the most likely to overdose, the most likely to catch HIV, the most likely to be arrested by the police, then the most likely to be jailed, the most likely to do their full jail sentence, the most likely to be rearrested, on and on. And that's who Vandu's membership is. And the reason we did that was we thought that if this is a sort of Bud Osborne thing. I don't know if anyone got to see Bud's new book. But the guiding principle then is that if the voice of the most marginalized drug addict and the conditions for them become better, and I use the term addict interchangeably with people who use drugs, and they're not the same thing, but it's up to the person who uses drugs to use those terms. Often in the downtown east side, it's very clear that people are addicts. So it's not as big of a deal, but in some groups of people who use drugs, if you use the term addict, they get really mad at you. So there's a huge discourse around people who use drugs, and people need to know that as you're talking about drug prohibition. Because it is important, I think, to be guided by the people who are being most damaged. And the other reason that this occurred in Vandu was that the most, many people who use drugs who can kind of slide into a job and are, you know, lawyers or something, and they get by, and they shoot heroin every day. One of the most important things that they do to create no harm to themselves, or very little harm to themselves, is they make sure no one ever finds out. So they're very unlikely to join a drug user group. And the other thing that happens at Vandu that's hopefully helpful. And I think, we've tried to have discussions with other drug user groups about this, and there's some arguments that will occur, is that you have users and former users. And we always say that because people use drugs and don't use drugs, and use drugs and don't use drugs. That's one thing. So why would you keep quitting a group and joining again? The most important thing it does is it creates a situation where people who are viewing the person who says, I'm the president of Vandu, and they're saying it on TV, because they're on TV all the time. Their landlord doesn't immediately go and say, you're a drug addict and you're kicked out of your housing. There's consequences to admitting drug use. So I say, don't admit drug use. Admit that maybe you used to use drugs, because I don't know if you've ever actually seen this. I've seen this. If you say, I'm a former user and I'm blah, 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 and I've got this much clean time, a whole room of people will spontaneously applaud. You're like this, just incredibly heroic person, because people do recognize how incredibly difficult that is. But if you actually are a drug user, you can be treated extremely badly. I mean, very, very badly. And I don't know if I have to convince any of you about how badly people can be treated if they are an active drug user. So what happens at Vandu very much is that because we always put that on the blanket, it's a group of users and former users who work to improve the lives of people who use illegal drugs through peer support and education. So when they go and speak somewhere, people will say, oh, I would never have known you were a drug addict unless you had told me. And the other sort of pregnant thing in the room, whether it's the media or someone from the Strathcona Residents Association, is they're just dying to ask them if they still use drugs, because they actually can't tell. And that's why they p-test people, because you can't tell if they're using drugs or not. Otherwise, you wouldn't need a p-test. You'd just smell their breath if they were drinking alcohol. So that's one of the things to say, that drug use is often very inert and not an issue for employment and all, and of course the really invasive things like p-tests. So this is a complete.
Yeah, I'd like to apologize. I think I said you spending thousands of dollars.
No, it's my, believe me. I think it's because my 6-year-old uses my computer.
No, it's just bloody computer, man.
Oh, is it? Okay, forget the slides.
That's such good slides, though.
They were great.
Yeah, that's why it's project, it can't access the transfer.
Anyway, it's not always or pleasant or easy to, this is not always easy, but it's harmful to the liberation movement for people who use drugs to select pet users or drug users that are easy to deal with. And that's a huge temptation. And the reason it doesn't work is because within a very short period of time, the dangers, dynamics, scene, whether the police are beating people this week or entrapping them in drug sales or giving them jaywalking tickets, is extremely topical, and you won't know that. So you shot dope, 10 years ago. Well, that's good. That really does qualify you to know a lot. You really know a lot. If you've ever been involved in the illicit drug use scene and shot dope, I know a lot about, I would say, yes, you're experiential, I'll call it. That's what I always tell the drug users to say. I've had that life experience, but never clue them in whether you still use or not. So, and that's about employment issues, right? You don't want to have them turn around after they hire you, like they did at Insight, and say, we hired you because you're junkies. So no, we're not going to pay you the same as the other union workers here. That isn't fair. So I say, well, it works both ways. Don't say that you're a junkie either. Just say, I have the life experience of a drug user, and that's my valuable asset. That's why I'm qualified for this position. And then just leave the pregnant pause. They have to ask you. And then I still skate around it, but it's up to people to disclose. I mean, no one asks straight people whether they drink wine or not, or are you a gin drinker, So anyway, there's a rigorous, transparent, democratic process central to any marginalized, oppressed group moving forward. And that's my hypothesis, because once the pet user thing starts up in any population, it happens with mental health issues. It certainly happens with race issues. They'll start saying, the Asian community is represented because there's somebody who happens to be Asian. And it's just not fair to any of the issues of us, and particularly the more issues there are. And I think what it does then too is it will always blanket the most, if we were going to say, are the most marginalized, poor, drug involved, least, maybe they have bloodborne pathogens or ill and all that stuff, are they likely to become the pet users? And you might say no, it's not always true. So this is encouraging users to form user groups that are controlled by users, and by this I mean the board of directors. tremendous controversy about what a user group is, and this goes on nationally, internationally, and around this city as well. I hypothesize that it is not a group that has no governance and no power. It is not user employees working at a place with that has a non-user board. So in other words, they hire nothing but active users to do whatever it is. Usually something that's too dangerous for other people to do. So in the States for a long time, needle exchange was illegal, so the active users got to do that, and they got wages and all that. But the board of directors of the outfit would be run by professionals.